Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's Impact webinar, Capitalizing on Carbon, Commercializing CCUS on a Global Scale. I am Linda, a content producer at Leader Associates, and I will be your host today. So today's discussion will give you an idea of what to expect from our upcoming Carbon Capture Global Summit in London this September. You will network with global policy architects, industrial giants, and investors there. We highly recommend locking in your spot early and stay up to date with our latest events. So let's look at today's agenda and let's see what we have lined up for today. So first, we have 7 industry experts sharing their perspectives on 4 topics. And then that's followed by a separate group of specialists who will discuss how we can enhance international CCUS partnerships. We're thrilled to have you all here. We have quite a hefty session today, so please sit tight. Please stick around till the end, but feel free to step away and return for your favorite topics. Type in your questions in the chat box or the Q&A box at any time, and we will answer them throughout the event. So it has been an intensely hot week in the UK and in the EU. We are experiencing climate change in real time, and it is only fitting that we talk about net zero goals and climate change and climate solutions today. CCUS stands to be a main pathway for heavy industries and many other industries to decarbonize, and it is picking up massive speed. While our storage potential is huge, the actual carbon capture and storage rates seem to lag behind. Real growth will come down to smoother market coordination, unified international rules, and stronger financial safety nets. So today we're bridging the gap between technical possibilities and the business frameworks needed to turn CCUS into a multi-billion-dollar global asset class. So with that said, I'm going to pass the mic to our first speaker, Ben Smith. He plays a key role in deploying infrastructure necessary to secure feasible net zero emissions energy for the UK. Ben, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Linda. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Ben Smith. I'm the Deputy Director in the CCUS programme within the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. And it's a real pleasure to kick off today's discussions. Now, if you'd asked me and asked people a decade ago what carbon capture and storage was, many people would describe it as an interesting technology with significant potential. Today, that's no longer the conversation. The question is no longer whether CCUS can play a role in decarbonisation. The question is much more about how quickly we can scale it up, how effectively we can commercialise it, and how much economic value it can create. That's why I'd like to explore today through the theme of billions in the making, the value embedded within CCUS pipelines. So just moving on to the first slide, thank you, that's great. So this slide really gets to the heart of why the UK CCUS pipeline really matters. When we talk about CCUS, it's easy to focus on the emissions reductions, but the story here is much, much greater than carbon. It's about the billions of pounds of value embedded within these assets, within the infrastructure, across the skills and industrial capability that we're building. The UK starts from a position of real strength. We've got large industrial base, world-class engineering expertise, and established energy infrastructure with some of the largest offshore CO2 storage resources across Europe. The storage resource in particular is important. The UK is estimated to have around 78 billion tonnes of theoretical storage capacity. In a world that's increasingly looking like there are ways to decarbonise heavy industry, manage emissions and produce low carbon products, that's not just an environmental asset, it's a real strategic economic asset that we should make the most of. So the cluster model that we've developed in the UK allows us to unlock that value by connecting industries to shared transport and storage infrastructure. We create economies of scale and reduce costs and increase confidence for investors. So what I'm basically saying is for every new emitter connecting into a network, that improves the overall value proposition of that infrastructure. But perhaps the biggest opportunity lies beyond our domestic market. Many European countries have industrial emissions, but limited geological storage capacity. As I mentioned, the UK has the potential to become a real regional hub for CO2 transport and storage, enabling industries across Europe to access secure and reliable storage solutions. That also creates real opportunity, not just for storage operators, but for ports, for engineering firms, infrastructure developers, supply chains, investors all across the country. So when we look at the current CCUS pipeline, we should see more than a collection of individual projects. We should see the foundations of a new industrial sector. The value embedded in today's pipeline is not simply the value of the projects themselves, it's the future value that comes from creating a network, developing expertise, attracting investment, and establishing a long-term competitive advantage to those other countries cannot easily replicate. The prize, therefore, is much larger than the decarbonisation alone. Done well, CCUS can help secure existing industries, unlock new growth opportunities, attract billions of pounds of investment, and position the UK as a global leader in carbon management. This is the opportunity in front of us. The question is not whether that value exists in the pipelines, it's how quickly and effectively we can unlock it. So just if we can move on to the next slide, please. So when people talk about CCUS, they often focus on infrastructure, the capture plants, the pipelines, and the storage sites. But one of the UK's greatest achievements has been something less visible. We've built a suite of business models that turn technical potential into investable opportunities. The challenge with a first-of-a-kind infrastructure is rarely just engineering. It's giving investors confidence that there will be a predictable route to revenue over the longer term. Without that certainty, capital remains on the sidelines. Projects struggle to move from concept into reality. What this slide really shows is that we haven't developed a single CCUS business model. We've developed an integrated set of commercial frameworks that support the different parts of the value chain. For transport and storage, we've created the transport and storage regulatory investment model, we call it the TRI, providing regulated returns and underpinning investment in all those shared infrastructures. For industry, we've developed industrial carbon capture business models that enable manufacturers and energy-intense sectors to decarbonise whilst remaining competitive. For hydrogen, we've created the hydrogen production business model, helping establish a market for low-carbon hydrogen and creating future demand for transport and storage services. For greenhouse gas removals and BECCS, we've begun to establish the frameworks needed to support negative emissions, and that's really going to deliver net zero over the longer term. And then through the arrangements such as the dispatchable power agreement, we're helping to ensure power generation can play its role in a decarbonised energy system. So taken together, these are more than individual policies. They are the foundations of a new market. The value embedded in today's CCUS pipeline comes not only from the assets currently being developed, but from the confidence that these frameworks provide the investors, developers, and supply chains. They reduce the risk, attract capital, create conditions for private investment to flow into the sector. In many ways, this is the UK's competitive advantage. We're not simply building projects, we're building functional carbon management economy. And if we succeed, the longer term value generated by these markets will be by many multiples of public investment that helps create them. So when we talk about billions in the making, we're not just talking about the projects in the current pipeline, we're talking about the value of creating an entirely new market, one capable of supporting growth, attracting investment, and establishing the UK as a leader in the global CCUS economy. So the real asset isn't just the infrastructure we're building today, it's the market we're creating for the next 30 years. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Right, thanks. So one of the most important things about the UK CCUS programme is that it's no longer a future ambition. We're now in delivery. Over the past few years, an enormous amount of effort's gone into developing the policy, as I mentioned, creating those business models, building investor confidence, and establishing the right commercial frameworks. The significance of this slide really shows that those foundations are now translating into real projects, real contracts, and real investment decisions. So in 2024, the government announced up to 21.7 billion of funding over 25 years to support the first two CCUS clusters, that's HyNet and the East Coast cluster. That commitment sent a powerful signal to the UK that we were serious about creating CCUS industry at scale. Since then, we've achieved a series of major milestones. So we hit financial close on the East Coast cluster in December 2024, the HyNet transport and storage network in 2025, and those were landmark moments, not just for the UK, but globally. What makes these projects particularly important is they demonstrate the whole CCUS value chain in action. On the East Coast cluster, the Northern Endurance Partnership is developing the infrastructure needed to transport and permanently store captured carbon beneath the North Sea, whilst net zero Teesside Power will become one of the world's first gas-powered fire stations with carbon capture and storage at scale. In HyNet, ENI's transport and storage system will provide the backbone infrastructure needed for industrial decarbonisation across the Northwest, while projects such as Protos Energy Recovery Facility and Padeswood Cement Works show how carbon capture can be deployed in some of the hardest to abate industries. These are not pilot projects, they're the first building blocks of a completely new industrial sector. And that brings us back to the theme of today's presentations, billions in the making. The value embedded within these projects is far greater than the capital being invested. These clusters create infrastructure that future projects can connect into. They create confidence for investors considering future opportunities. They support jobs, grow supply chains, and establish capabilities that can be then exported on an international basis. But perhaps the most important that they demonstrate is the UK can move from policy ambition to delivery. The real value of these clusters is not just the carbon that they store on the emissions that they reduce, it's the creation of a platform upon which the next generation of projects, networks and investment opportunities can be built. So in many ways, these first projects are about proving the UK is not simply planning a CCUS industry, we're creating one. So the first £1 billion of value comes from building the clusters. The next tens of billions comes from everything that connects to them. So we can move on to the next slide, please. So this slide is about proving the concept and scaling it. The real value of CCUS is not just created by a handful of projects, as I mentioned, operating in isolation. It comes from building networks that can support an industrial region and attract new users over time. That's exactly what the next phase of the program is designed to do. So we've already established the foundations through the first track 1 clusters that I mentioned. The task now is about maximizing that value of the infrastructure being brought and additional projects onto those networks and increasing the utilization of the assets we've already worked so hard to establish. This is why the spending review settlement is so significant. The £9.4 billion of capital budget provides the opportunity to move far beyond those first projects and towards a genuine scaled carbon management industry. So we're already seeing this happen. In HyNet, we've got 8 projects that are currently in negotiations through the expansion process. In the East Coast cluster, we kicked off that expansion process with applications now being considered. Alongside of this, we've launched a non-pipeline transport pathfinder, a program that's designed to create opportunity for projects that may not be able to directly connect into those pipelines. And it's going to be really important, as I mentioned before, about international volumes. What this all demonstrates immensely is it's a growing market demand. Industry is not simply responding to government policy. Businesses are actively investing time, resources and capital because they see the long-term value in participating in these networks. We're also broadening the geographical reach of the programs. The government supports the Acorn and Viking clusters. We recognise the strategic importance of developing additional storage across the UK. So subject to readiness and affordability, these projects have the potential to strengthen the UK's position as a European leading carbon storage transport hub. So the Peak cluster is another great example of an ecosystem that continues to grow. The National Wealth Fund support helps create new opportunities for industrial decarbonisation in these sectors that have traditionally been difficult to reach. And this is where the theme of today's presentation becomes particularly important. The value embedded in the current pipeline is not simply the value of projects already announced. It's the option value created by the infrastructure, the networks, the supply chains, and the investor confidence that those projects enable. So every new project that joins a network improves the economies of that system. Every expansion that we create opportunities for future investment, and every additional ton of storage capacity strengthens the UK's competitive position. In other words, we're not just funding projects, we're building a platform for long-term industrial growth. And that's why the opportunity is so significant. The first phase proved that CCUS can be delivered. The next phase determines how much value we can unlock from it. So to summarize, the first cluster has created the market. Expansion is where we begin to realize the full economic value. We can move on to the next slide, please. So we talked a little bit about the value embedded in the projects, the infrastructure, the expansion opportunities, but to unlock the full potential of the CCUS market, the market itself must continue to evolve. The first phase of the programme has focused on market creation. So government's intervention has been essential to establish the initial projects, build investor confidence and demonstrate that CCUS can be delivered at scale. That approach is working. We've seen the projects that I mentioned and now investing and building those projects. We have projects in construction. The expansion processes that I mentioned previously are underway. and a growing interest from developers, investors, and industrial users. But the long-term objective has to be about being bigger, delivering the first wave of projects. Success means that moving from government-supported market to one that increasingly is self-sustaining, competitive, and capable of attracting investment on a broader commercial basis. That's why we're now focusing on that next phase of the market development. We're considering how the future transport and storage network should evolve, how third-party access can increase competition and utilization, and how mechanisms such as the non-pipeline transport that I've already mentioned can open up opportunities for a wider range of projects and regions. So at the same time, we're exploring how to support frameworks and how we can evolve them over time. The aim is to remove support, the aim is not to remove support prematurely, but to create pathways that enable markets to become more efficient, more scalable, and increasingly driven by commercial demand. What's particularly encouraging is that industry is actively engaging in the conversation. The discussions that we're having are no longer simply about whether CCUS can work. They're increasingly about how quickly the market can grow and what structures are needed to support that massive growth. And that takes us to the next question. If we demonstrated the value of projects, infrastructure, market creation, what does the long-term prize look like for the UK economy? So the first chapter of CCUS has been about proving the concept. The next chapter is about maximising that economic value that we can create for the UK. And so if I move on to the final slide, please. Thanks. So I'd like to finish with what I believe is one of the most exciting opportunities. This is an area close to my heart because it sits within my team and cuts across the entire CCUS programme. So the first phase, as I mentioned, on UK CCUS has been understandably focused on building pipelines and storage networks connected to industrial clusters. That made sense. It was the most direct route to proving the technology, establishing the business models and creating confidence in the market. But as the market develops, we need to think beyond pipelines. So non-pipeline transport, particularly shipping and terminals, has the potential to fundamentally expand the reach of our carbon capture networks and storage facilities. It creates opportunities for industrial sites that are not located near those kind of existing networks. It provides flexibility within the system and can help manage risks right across the value chain. More importantly, it allows us to think about CCUS as a national and even international network rather than a series of individual clusters. That's why the work underway in the MPT consultation that we launched and the Pathfinder programme is so important. These initiatives are helping us to understand how shipping can operate commercially, how those risks should be allocated, and what the regulatory frameworks are needed, and how we can create a market that remains attractive to investors while delivering value for money. The opportunity extends beyond that. The UK's competitive advantage is not simply that we can decarbonise our own industries, as I've mentioned. It's what we possess as world-class offshore storage resources that can potentially serve a much wider market. So through the cross-border CO2 networks, we've the opportunity to become a destination for carbon storage services, supporting industries right across Europe, while creating new sources of economy for the UK. This is why the story of billions in the making comes full circle. The value embedded in today's pipeline is not just the projects currently under construction, it's the billions already committed. It's the future networks, the industries, supply chains, those export opportunities, and the private investment that really make these foundations possible. What started as a decarbonisation programme is increasingly becoming an industrial growth opportunity. And if we get that right, future generations may look back on these first clusters not only as the end goal, but as the starting point for a new UK industry, one that combines climate leadership, energy expertise, and economic growth. So just to summarise, the true value of CCS is not the carbon we store today, but the markets, industries, and opportunities we unlock tomorrow. Thank you. I'll pause there. If there are any questions, happy to take.
Thank you, Ben. I do have a question just from hearing your presentation. So you mentioned the non-pipeline transport, and I don't think this is the first time I've heard of this sort of new transportation pathway. I'm just wondering, how does it compare to the pipeline transport? What does the demand look like? What advantages does it have?
Yeah, really good question. So non-pipeline transport offers a great opportunity in that it provides new sectors with a route to be able to decarbonise. So we've got a number particularly in the UK, but right across Europe, we've got a number of projects that we speak to regularly that want to be able to decarbonize. They want to be able to offer up their products into markets. For example, cement works and others. They want to be able to, as I say, decarbonize. And what MPT really unlocks for them is a real potential to be able to enter into that area and use rail, shipping, road, etc. over time to unlock that potential. And then if we broaden that out right across Europe, that also opens up huge amounts of opportunity on a global scale for projects, as I say, to be able to choose a decarbonised pathway for the future. And that in turn protects jobs, it creates growth opportunities, it embeds supply chains within those organisations and countries as well. So it far reaches far greater than where maybe the traditional pipelines that we've been focusing on today has unlocked. Alongside of that, I think it also offers the opportunity to balance as well, so offer flexibility onto the storage and piped networks as well. So if we take, for example, a power station, we know that a power station isn't going to be running all of the time. And when I say a power station, I mean a CCUS embedded power station. They might run 50%, 75% of the time, but they will want to be able to have access into the network as and when the market needs them to run. So what MPT can do is that can fill up that capacity when the power station isn't needing it. And so that overall brings down the cost of delivering CCUS to consumers. It adds value in and maximizes the offering to consumers and taxpayers as well. So it's not only a growth opportunity both within the UK and across Europe, but it's also a better value for money offering as well.
I see. Well, excellent. Thank you. That definitely answered my question. I think in your presentation, you also mentioned building a self-sustaining market. And it just so happens that our next section is going to be about building a self-sustaining commercial CCUS market. And we actually have two speakers for this section. And our first speaker, Alexandra Fasola from Heidelberg, is ready. And thank you, Ben. We are going to move on to the next section. Alexandra, if you're ready.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. Ben, great presentation. As you know, Heidelberg Materials is also part of the HyNet cluster, so we're very, very happy with what is happening in the UK as well. It's a great example. And actually, as we are speaking to other governments and other project leaders, for example, in Poland, we are highly speaking about the HyNet cluster. In Poland, a cluster model would also apply, for example. So it's great to learn from all of these examples. I'm excited by Yvonne's session afterwards as well. We are also working with Rystad when we're looking at carbon pricing. And yeah, so let's start. My name is Alex. I'm working for Heidelberg Materials in the CCUS decarbonization division, let's call it like that. We have a vast portfolio of projects in Europe and in the United States. And indeed, over the years, we have tried to find a way to make these projects bankable. And it was a long journey, and we learned a lot along the way. So I think what we see now in the market is we will see an acceleration purely based on these learnings that all the players have done and on much more knowledge sharing. Let me try to start to share my slides. So I'm new to Zoom. Let me see if this is it.
There should be a share button. There you go.
Now
Seems
you see
to be
it.
working.
Perfect. Very good. Exactly. So as you know, Heidelberg Materials, very, very popular. Brevik was launched in 2025. It's a plant that captures 50% of the CO2 that is produced in Brevik. So 400 kilotons of CO2 per year. The next project that we have FID'd is actually the one in the UK, Padeswood. And my task is now to see which one in the pipeline will be next, which one is the next bankable project. This is very, very interesting because the first projects that were FID'd were highly dependent on public funding. But I think the next ones, and we see it in the market, the next ones will have to rely more and more on market mechanisms and not so much on the public funding. So what we have learned over the years is it is very important to, first of all, minimize the risks and the costs of such a project. So when we compare offshore storage versus onshore storage, from a purely cost perspective, it is, of course, most cost effective to have a storage closer to the plant. This is what we mean by that. In terms of technologies, there are many technologies being still evaluated, and I think the winning technology cost-wise was not yet discovered, so to say. But so each player is experimenting with different ones. That is actually a very good thing for the market. But we might see that evolving also over the years. Another way to make these projects more bankable is to have a revenue stream. So at Heidelberg Materials, we have the decarbonized cement. We call it EvoZero. And I will talk to you a little bit more about our concept, how we developed it and how it has evolved over time. And as I mentioned, the remaining gap must be filled by national funding or European funding. This funding, very important to know, it comes from the pockets created by the ETS revenue. So I think it's also very important that all of us speak also to the public to make it clear our projects are funded by the carbon tax and not necessarily by other taxpayers' money. So I think that's very important. Climate policy can become self-funding over the years, and we are off to a very good start. Back to the EvoZero concept, we have developed this a few years before the Brevik plant was live. And knowing that it's going to be the first project on the market and the first net or near zero cement produced, we had already thought about how we could market it not just in Norway, but all over Europe. So we developed the concept of EvoZero Virtual. That means that today, our customers who are maybe further away from Norway, let's take Spain as it is in this example, they can already benefit from the near zero cement. What we do, we use our carbon bank that is using a blockchain like Ledger technology to make sure that we are not double counting the carbon. So every ton of CO2 that is stored goes to our carbon bank, and every ton of CO2 that is being sold via the product, virtual or physical, is getting accounted for in the carbon bank. So we have a mechanism. It is Heidelberg Material owned and developed. And of course, we see that the market will probably develop also from there. So right now it's Heidelberg Material only, EvoZero, virtual physical, carbon bank. In the future, there might be other mechanisms developing. But again, off to a very good start. What we learned in the last years, and I think Ben also mentioned it, the captured CO2 starts to have a value, not just to us as emitters, but it starts to have a value to our customers and also to other companies and corporations who want to abate their carbon emissions. A large-scale project like the ones that Heidelberg Materials has in their portfolio, I have to mention that our projects capture and store around 1 million ton of CO2 per year. And that is quite large. So if you would compare it to a DAC facility, that is actually quite large. The stored CO2 has in multiple ways. I will start from right to left. So first of all, it's the policy value, what I mentioned before. For us as an emitter, of course, the stored CO2 means we are exempted from the ETS tax in Europe. But it also has a value because there are funding mechanisms that are connected to the amount of CO2 that you store. So a CCFD or national funding will be strictly connected to the amount of CO2 that you are storing. In the US, we talk about tax credits. So the policy value is quite clear. And let's remember, this is how we all started on this journey. We all thought at the beginning, how can I avoid these costs, right? Then over time, we saw that's not enough. And now we see more and more that the stored CO2 has value in terms of carbon credits and low carbon products. I already discussed the low carbon products, EvoZero. We also have EvoBuild. It's a similar concept to EvoZero with different amount of CO2 captured. I won't go into the details. But then we have the part of carbon credits. And maybe Yvonne will touch more on that. But we see that for a third party, for a customer of Heidelberg Materials, the stored CO2 could have a value, whether we talk about biogenic CO2, that could have a value as a CDR, as a carbon dioxide removal. But if we talk about the fossil CO2, that one can also be monetized via credit. Let's call it an EAC. The market mechanism is not yet there for all of these products or carbon, monetization of carbon. But we see the market evolving more and more towards having all these policies and all these monetization structures valued in the future. This is how we think about our CCS project. So I will just do a little bit of a recap. When we talk about CCS, it doesn't mean that we will abolish our conventional levers. It just means that we take a stacking approach. So we start, of course, with the most cost-optimal levers, so the conventional ways to reduce CO2. And once those have reached the limitation, the last mile should be done by CCS. So this is, again, very important also for the policymakers to understand. subsidizing CCS doesn't mean we abolish the conventional levers. On the contrary, we will always first start with that. What does it mean for cement? It means lowering the clinker value in cement, so encouraging our customers to use products that already have a lower CO2 concentration, using alternative cementitious materials, and of course, burning alternative fuels, so not burning 100% fossil fuels anymore. Of course, there are technical limitations to that, but we try to maximize the use of these conventional levers. The last mile and the most expensive mile is the CCS, but the CCS is for us the only way to reduce carbon. And this is shown on this slide. So 2/3 of our emissions come from the limestone. That means that is the raw material that we burn. That means that no matter how much I avoid the CO2 by the conventional levers, I will always have the emissions from the limestone. The only way to account for that is to capture them. So I think it's important to understand this distinction as well. And 1/3 comes from the fuels. There I can, of course, play with more conventional levers. This is an illustration of the revenue versus cost avoided side. So on the one hand side, we started this project by looking at bottom line growth and saying, is there a way to avoid this carbon tax in the future? But on the other hand, we are trying to make a case. We have more than 20 plants to decarbonize in Europe. And that means that we need to decarbonize them one by one in a sustainable rhythm and try to make that a project funds the next project in a way. So we had to find a way also to bring value to all these projects. So let's say we are not here doing projects. I think none of us is doing, of course, we are passionate of what we do, but there must be a monetization. There must be a value to all of this to help that to ensure that this transition is sustainably done. And that's how we came up with the product EvoZero, with the products EvoZero EvoBuild, so decarbonized cement and concrete. To conclude, but of course, I'm also open for questions. We are not yet there, but we are learning a lot along the way. And I think what we need to see going forward is a better symbiosis between policies and market mechanisms. So if there are players out there willing already to pay for the stored carbon, to benefit from using low carbon cement and concrete, let's enable them to do so. So we are trying to reach them. I hope there will be market mechanisms to encourage them to benefit from these products. And I hope we will see this evolving more and more over time. So I think all of us are grateful for the policy help that was there, for the government's help that was there. We hope that still remains, but it's time for us to bring in and to enable more and more the market mechanisms to help us all reach successful projects. So thanks a lot.
All right, thank you, Alex. We do have one question in the Q&A box. So there was a great comment about CCS projects being funded by carbon tax on polluters and not general taxation. Is that the case in the UK as well as in the EU 27?
Perhaps Ben has the better answer to this question, but to my knowledge, the funds from the UK are also funded by the UK ETS. Ben?
Yes, I can come in on that. It varies actually, is the honest answer, because for example, if you build a power station, then the DPA essentially uses money that comes from consumers through the supplier levy, and then things like the TNS networks are built from taxation. So it's a bit of consumer money plus taxation. And then we're developing frameworks and contracts that look at things like the GGR and BECS that could use voluntary carbon markets. And then over time with UK ETS integration, then that could come through those markets as well.
Yeah. But in Europe, so the EU Innovation Fund uses for sure revenues from the EU ETS. And to my knowledge, lots of these national funding programs also use EU ETS money. So I think the French program, the German project, they will use EU ETS, the German funding scheme, they will use EU ETS money. So of course, there's a mix. I think, Ben, when you mentioned the pipelines and the infrastructure, perhaps there are other funding buckets that go into there. But I think the majority, especially in the EU, does come from the EU ETS. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, Ben, as well. Cool. I think we're going to move on to the next speaker, Tina Schøn from Danish Energy Agency. And I believe Alexandra mentioned that policy is definitely needed and like more market mechanisms is needed. And Tina will probably dive into that in her presentation. Tina, whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much, Linda, and thank you for having me. It's a great honor to present a little bit about the Danish approach to CCS. My name is Tina Schøn. I work at the Danish energy agency in the CCS division, and I am the team leader for those who have been implementing public tenders for CCS in Denmark. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and a little bit about the policy in Denmark. I'll try to share my slides, if I can manage.
Mm-hmm. All right. Seems to be working. Yep.
It seems to be working. That is very good. So basically, I've made a little agenda for my presentation. So why do we do CCS in Denmark? What is the political framework? A little bit about government funding, which is not ETS funded. It is basically taxpayers' monies that has been allocated for this. And then a little bit about the current status of some of our projects, and then some lessons learned. So basically, since 2020, CCS has been prioritized by different Danish governments, as well as a broad majority in the parliament. Focus has very much been on fulfilling the Danish climate goals that have been stipulated by law in this country. So the climate goals includes a 70% CO2 reduction by 2030 compared with 1990, and climate neutrality by 2045. So basically, CCS is regarded as a key tool for achieving these climate goals, including green transition of industry and energy production. Politically, it's recognized that combating climate change requires a combination of many technologies. And as Alex pointed out earlier, the focus is on using CCS where there are no better alternatives for CO2 reductions. Since 2020, 8 political agreements have been concluded with broad consensus concerning the development of solid framework conditions for CCS in Denmark. The political agreements have included state aid to support development of a full-scale CCS value chain. In the longer perspective, it is very much the goal for CCS to become market-based or market-driven, but there's been a recognition that it is not there yet. Denmark, at the same time, Denmark has some of the best geological conditions in Europe for securing CO2 storage. And it has been a political goal, to make use of this potential to enable full-scale CO2 storage in Denmark, which also includes import and export of CO2, developing Denmark into a European hub for CO2 storage. So basically, we have concluded 3 competitive tenders, leading to 5 contracts on CCS in Denmark. Contracts with private companies which have committed to capturing and storing CO2. The tenders have been slightly different, but some of the basic design features have been repeated through the 3 tenders. So basically, it is important to note that the CO2 reductions must count in the Danish national inventory. That means the point source must be in Denmark, although the storage can be outside the country. Subsidy is only paid out once the CO2 has been stored, which in a way makes the operator responsible for the entire value chain. So if you capture the CO2, you will not get any funding until you can document that the CO2 has been stored. It is also important to note that our subsidy programs cover costs related to the entire value chain, so the costs of capturing, transporting, and storing the CO2. The lengths of the contracts have varied from 7 to 20 years, and they have all included some aspects of a contract for difference mechanism to minimize the risk of overcompensation. In total, 4 billion euros have been allocated, with a target of delivering reductions of 3.2 million tonnes of CO2 annually from 2030. If we zoom into the 3 tenders, we started with the CCUS fund, and in 2023, we signed a contract with Rystad. Rystad will be capturing and storing 430,000 tons of CO2 from 2026 and for 20 years. The amount allocated to this is 1.2 billion euro. I will talk about this project in a little later. Then we had the negative emissions from CCS fund, the next fund, where we signed contracts with 3 biogas producers in 2024. They will be capturing 160,000 tons in total from 2026 and in 7 years. 155 million euro have been allocated. We have seen that the two first rounds of tenders, the projects have been slightly delayed in their startup phase. So we are just about to see the first capture and storage taking place. Last month, we signed our last contract with Aalborg Portland, the cement factory. We only have one in this country. Aalborg Portland will be capturing and storing 1,250,000 tons of CO2 from 2030. 3.75 billion euro has been allocated for this project. So I will just, as I promised, I'll talk a little bit about Ørsted's project. They will be capturing 430,000 tons per year from this year. The CO2 will stem from the power stations in Asnæs and Avedøre. Both of them are fired with sustainable biomass, basically waste product from Danish farmers and leftover wood from Denmark and the Baltic region. They will capture their CO2 by use of the amine technology. And apart from the state aid, Ørsted is financing the project through sale of certified carbon removal credits for 3.67 million tons over 11 years. And basically, the credits have been purchased by Microsoft. The CO2 will be transported from Avedøre to Asnæs by truck and then by vessel to Norway, where it will be stored in a Northern Light facility. I would also just like to mention that in parallel, Ørsted and Equinor are collaborating to establish a transport and storage facility onshore in the Kalundborg region, and that project is in the exploration phase. Aalborg Portland has developed the Action project, where they will capture and store 1,250,000 tons from 2030 from their cement factory in the north of Denmark. The aid per ton is 117 euro. And remember that covers the cost of capturing, transporting, and storing each ton. Aalborg Portland will use cryogenic capture technology. Basically, they cool the gas streams to very low temperatures, which then transforms the CO2 into a liquid or solid, so it can be separated from the rest of the gas quite easily. Transport will happen in two CO2 pipelines to an onshore storage facility in Denmark. The pipelines still need to be built, and the storage facility is currently in the exploration phase. It's also worth to note that the project has obtained 220 million euro in support from the EU Innovation Fund. Basically, a short overview of the development of storage in Denmark. It's a little bit hard to see on the map, I realize, but there's a small orange dot in the North Sea, and this is the one storage facility that so far has obtained a storage permit. It is the EnEarth Green Sand project located offshore Denmark, and they will be transporting CO2 by vessel from the harbor of Esbjerg. We currently have actually, this is the storage facility that will receive the CO2 from the next winners. Currently, there are 6 exploration licenses that the Danish Energy Agency has granted. And you can see them on the map, both onshore and offshore. If successful, the storage projects will need to apply for an actual storage permit. What have we learned? Basically, it is the Danish experience that there is a need to de-risk and address the chicken and the egg paradox. And we have seen that public funding is necessary to kickstart the value chain and to reduce business risks. As I started by saying, we hope that it will be market-driven at a later stage. In Denmark, framework conditions badly needed to be developed from when we started in 2020. We have made more than 10 laws have been amended or written anew. And we have seen that legislation can actually move quickly if there's political interest that is high enough and if there's support in Parliament. And I would like to also stress that public support, both for the political developments, but also for the individual projects is a key. We have engaged in close cooperation between private sector, municipalities, and public authorities, and that has proven key for developing a new value chain. And finally, I would like to stress cross-border cooperation to, for instance, allow for cross-border transport of CO2 as a key. That was what I had prepared.
All right. Thank you, Tina. We do have one question from our live stream here. So this is more focused on like a detail on the numbers. So you showed 3.75 billion euros funding for Alberg, but then 2.1 billion on a different slide. So they're just wondering what is the difference between those two numbers? Why is the difference?
It's the different tenders that had different amounts of money allocated to them, basically.
Yeah. Okay. I think that probably answers the question. I imagine it's probably from different funds.
It's different funding allocated on the Danish Finance Act at different times for different political agreements, basically.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Cool. We're going to move on to our next section. So we all know that inflation is a very real problem right now, and we're all wondering, how does this affect the CCUS industry? How will the industry navigate through the period? So today we have Yvonne Lam from Rystad Energy.
Hi. Yes, I'm trying to share my screen, but okay, now I should be able to do so. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet all of you, and thank you for the opportunity. So my name is Yvonne. I head up the clean tech departments and divisions in Rystad Energy. And for those of you who wonder what Rystad Energy does, we are actually a data intelligence company and also consulting company that actually have a focus on everything under the energy radar or energy industry and energy system itself. Today I'm going to talk about the inflations and also what is the investment outlook potential for CCS, focusing a little bit on like short term, and then we'll move it to the long term. But before I start, I think like it is worth to actually tackle a question where I get a lot in the CCS industry, is that is the CCS market has burst, compared to like in year 2022, are we seeing like a bubble burst for CCS industry now? So I would say that instead of industry that has burst, it is more of that the industry is coming into rationalization rather than a bursting of a bubble, because when we say bursting of a bubble, its investment has already put in. Now we are in the situations where projects which actually make sense, developers are starting to like be able to know and rationalize what would be able to move, what would not be able to move the needle. That is actually shaping the market itself. So first of all, I would like to just stress that in 2022, when there was actually a lot of attention given to energy transitions, we see that there are a lot of projects that announced their project pipelines. So you can see that in 2022, the project pipelines was tracking quite nicely on the with this dotted line. However, in today's scenario, you can see that the bar chart is the pipelines, which is unrest. And then based on our REST pipelines or REST scorecards, you can see that Rystad Energy thinks the base case for capacity built up by 2030, it's standing at around 175 million tons per annum. And with a worsened situations in the inflations and also capacity constraint in the EPC market, we are expecting even lower at 150 million tons per annum by 2030. And just for context, the operational capacity and under development capacity, which is represented by these two bottom bar here, it's already fitting at 115 million tons per annum. So that means that 115 to 150 million tons annum, the difference is only 35 million tons per annum. Not a lot, but it is not going to be easy to get there. Let's talk about the project that has already FID so far. So first of all, if you pay attention to the country, looking at the global scale, first thing that you will notice is that majority of these projects are coming from Europe. The main reason is because there are subsidies, like speakers before have highlighted the need for subsidies and how subsidies and support from the government has helped the projects to move into FID. But we also see some interesting cases, and you have those that are in Middle East, even though they have get into FID previously, but now with the situations in Middle East, with the war in Middle East, some of the plants are even being destroyed. So that means that the projects could be addressed even post FID. And on top of this, in where I am currently, having a business trip now in Korea, you can see that Asia Pacific are also having some projects being announced despite having zero support from any of the governments. There's no subsidies, there's no tax credits. It's purely based on the investments from this company itself. So today, I guess like one thing that we can actually look into is that Europe provides most of the fundings to CCS projects, but does it guarantee a project moving into FID? The short answer is no. So even though you get the funding, as mentioned by Alexandra before, it's not enough to move the needle. You need to actually rely on multiple schemes and multiple different financial schemes to actually stack on top of each other to make sense. You can see that looking into fundings, many of these projects, they don't get 100% of the fundings. So that means that the reasons for them able to justify the investments, it's mainly because they're able to rationalize and then also put all this business case together. Looking into the investments, given that we are currently in a situations where energy security is prioritized over energy sustainability, it is very important to think about how much more of these investments it's going to go into CCUS in the future. If you look at the oil and gas industries, these majors, they are the ones who actually have announced that they will invest heavily in CCUS. If you look at their 2023 guidance, which are represented by the circle that it's actually with line versus their 2026 guidance, you will see a very dramatic decrease, especially for BP. You can see in here, from here to here, from on average 15 to 20% investments in low carbons in their total portfolio to less than 10%. So I think like it is actually very safe to say that we don't really expect there will be new projects announcement or many new projects announcements. We will not be able to see the excitement that we see in the past. It's more about projects that already announced and rationalizing how they are actually going to make that forward. Now, looking into the index of inflations and also interest rates, the first thing that I would like to talk about is that CCS projects are very capital heavy. Capital heavy means that you need to rely on financing schemes, and financing schemes means that it's related to interest rate. And currently, with the high commodity prices, means that inflation is on the rise. When inflations rise, interest rate will go up as well. So meaning borrowing is going to be more expensive, project cost is going to go up. If you look on the left-hand side, this is actually the cost index for low carbon project. If you look at the black line, which I have highlighted, which is for CCS, we have this for from 2022 up until in the future. But I'm just showing that what has happened before is that CCUS have experienced an increased inflations on the capex steadily, especially since end of 2024. We even get this comment on from some of these EPC companies or like some of these project developers that they have seen a price hike on equipments as much as 40%. So that's actually something that we have to keep in mind, that we are in a time where material costs and also project development costs can actually be at a very, very high rate compared to what we expected before when we are actually doing the studies for these projects. And then next, besides the interest rate and also the inflations, I think it's one thing that very important to note is about or more than 80% of the CCS projects equipment and resources are overlap or similar to those that is in the oil and gas industry. You can see that many of these companies that it's the EPC contractor for CCS projects like Technip or Baker or SLB. These are companies which involve in the upstream, midstream, and downstream activities in the oil and gas markets. And if you look at the total capacity that this company has in year 2013, which is the peak oil price of $100 per barrel, in 2025, we are already at the peak of this capacity that they could take in. So in other words, there is a constraint in terms of capacity for this EPC company to take in work, large scale EPC projects, mega projects, that is actually coming from CCS or hydrogen itself. So what this means is that there is going to be an expectations of green premium from here as well because of the capacity constraint, because of the material heights. And then on top of this, when we make these comparisons, it was before the outbreak of the war in the Middle East. So now, when the Middle East is actually in war, even though now there's already ceasefire, we can expect that about $40 billion is going to go into reparation and restoration of existing infrastructure. So that means that you could expect there is even more pressure put on the EPC for reparations around here. So that means that we will have to actually brace for high price in the EPC area for quite some time in this decade. And then next, looking into the capture technology, which is it can be 50 to 80% of the cost for CCS project itself. Conventional technologies has been preferred compared to newer technologies, which represents by the lighter bar chart in here. And what this translates into is that the demand for conventional technology, which usually it's amine based, it's higher than the market could actually take if this project is actually moving as it goes, which is based on our base case itself. So what we can see here is for the consumables of amines from now until 2035, which is, many of these projects have moved to the right-hand side, moved to post-2030. It's possible to say that if these projects, based on our base case scenario, not the unrisked case, that means the unrisked case is even higher for this. On the base case scenario, it is already taking a lot of, or creating a lot of demand on the amine, which can put a constraint into the supply of amine. Bear in mind that amine, it's derived from hydrocarbons. When the hydrocarbon price is high, means that the price of this consumable, which is mainly driving the OPEX, is going to be very high as well. So that means that, project developers now will have to start to consider alternative technology, which number one, does not use amine, probably. Number two, or more flexible technology, whereby in the event where the price of amines is increased, you have a supply constraints, then you can be flexible in terms of like switching to another type of solvents. And then also considering the environmental impact and constraints, especially in Europe for using amines, because you need to actually dispose them safely. So in other words, those that doesn't degrade that frequently will be preferred compared to those that you have to change them very frequently. But the silver lining to everything that I mentioned here is that we're starting to see new entrants in the EPC market. So it's not just the traditional oil and gas players. We have seen new EPC players that it's starting to come into the market itself from Asia Pacific, which could possibly reduce the constraints in the capacity and then also bring down the cost. And then also one more thing is that water has been something that is actually very important for CCS, because we need water for cooling, for flushings, for as a solvents, and then also startup activity, etc. However, currently with the AI boom and the build up of data centers, there is a possibility constraint in water as well, because data centers will consume a lot of water for cooling. And then many of this capital is actually going to data centers. So that means that there will be possibly less capital that can actually go into CCS. Looking into more of the bright side, so how can project developers make sure that they are able to go through this challenging time, which I mentioned just now in the high inflations and also, expected constraints from EPC. One thing that we see, which is already mentioned just now, is how you can actually bring down your costs. I'm just giving some example in here. This is a project in Australia. So Pilot Energy have claimed that they are able to reduce 63% of the capex by just reusing or repurposing the existing infrastructure. So that's one. And then also we can see this project in China. There are 40% cost reductions in the capture plants as what they have reported, mainly by using locally produced technology, because that has a huge impact in terms of the cost. If you don't have your technologies, you have to import from some other countries, means it's going to be expensive. So locally produced technologies could potentially and have help them to reduce their cost significantly. And then another thing that would be very interesting to pay attention to, even for Europe, it's CO2 utilizations. The reason is because even though I mentioned at the beginning that we don't really think that we will back to the era where there's a lot of projects developments or new projects that will be announced, but we are seeing a steady growth in CCU projects, despite the reductions in the CCS projects area. And you can see here the top count of projects for CCU, it's in Europe, second coming in Asia. Making CCU a commodity, it's also part of the stacking in making sure that the business case works. So if you look at Asia Pacific in particular, you can see that China is leading all of this, and they have actually registered quite a number of patents on technology developments for CCS, for carbon capture and also utilization. I think that's something that we can expect, is that technology advancement will still happen, and there are quite a number of them. It's actually focusing on CO2 utilizations, can be quite promising. However, the maturity of these technologies will take some time. It's not very mature now, so that means that it will take some time before we get there. And then lastly, yes, I was actually going to talk about CDR credits. So carbon dioxide removal credit, especially the technology-based CDR credits, is actually one of the most important instruments in terms of helping to build the case for CCS projects, and it will be even more so in the future. One of the main reasons is that the CRCF framework in Europe is actually proposing, which we expected to actually know quite soon, that CDR credits could be accepted into compliance for compliance abatements for EU ETS. So that means that, moving forward, if that is the case, we could possibly see a demand coming from EU ETS or compliance for CDR credits, which then, when there's a demand, then the markets will actually be able to work in its own, hopefully without much of the subsidies that's actually needed in the future. So that's all what I have today. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions, and feel free to drop me an email or a message as well if you have questions outside of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Yvonne, we do have one question here, but I think I'm not too sure what they're asking, so I'm gonna put it in live. So what about constraints on rail cars where rail transport is considered? Tariq, if you could perhaps clarify what that question means, that would be good. I do have a question from my side. So I know inflation has definitely taken a toll on a lot of industries, and it's not just the CCUS industry. So how does CCUS compare to other renewable energies in terms of investment? Is it shrinking faster than other markets? Would you say it's about the same rate?
Yeah, well, it's not really apple-to-apple comparisons, right? Because powers and renewables industry, let's just put it this way. Renewable industry, you are actually creating power, you're creating electrons, right? So that means that you are helping with the energy security issues. We are actually seeing the opposites, because the closure of Strait of Hormuz, especially in Asia Pacific, countries are trying to secure their volumes. They are trying to make sure that these choke points, on this country itself, where they rely so much on the oil and gas from the Middle East, will not happen in the future anymore. So that means that investing in powers and renewables, or in renewables in general, it's more to actually make sure that they are able to have enough electricity and that it's able to sustain the demand in the future. Whereas for CCS, it is more of a waste management discussion. So it is always about the willingness to pay. So if you have an industry which have very high margin, for example, and the company is actually care or they get a lot of pressures from the public about their emissions, then there's a willingness to pay. One good example is the wave of AI growth, which drive a lot of like data centers developments. We can see that semiconductors are also like developing and also have like very high margin, right? So there are quite a bit of willingness to pay in there because they're operating in a very high margin environment. Then they could be able to, like an increase in costs in the power generations with CCS. It's not that significant compared to, how the market it's moving for in terms of like supply and demand balances for them. So I think, in terms of investments, because it's waste management, then yes, outside of Europe, I would say we are facing like significant challenges in terms of getting the capital, securing capitals, and also like projects delays and investments going into CCS. But in Europe, I mentioned about rationalizations, projects that have secure fundings from the governments. They are being cushioned. They have like higher chance of moving forward, but it's not given. And then also those who are more advanced in discussions, which have secure long lead items, have signed long-term contracts with EPC. Those are actually like more safer in that sense than those that are at early stage.
All right, thank you so much. That was a very insightful presentation. So next, we're going to move on to the Mediterranean region. We have 3 speakers for this section who will share very exciting developments regarding projects like Ravenna and Project Prinos. So let's first welcome Agime Gerbeti from Italy's Ministry of the Environment and Energy Security.
Good morning to everybody. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak in this conference, but also to follow this such interesting presentations that the speakers made. Yes, in the recent years, Italy has changed its approach to the CCS, whereas until recently, almost nothing was in place in terms of regulatory framework for the value chain of the CCS. A legislative process is now underway to establish a stable and coherent regulatory system. This is thanks to the Callisto project, which involved France, Italy, and Greece, recognized as a project of common interest, so PCI, and in particular is thanks to the real project that we have in Italy, the Ravenna hub. As a first step, Italy started after the transposition, of the CCS directive, started in 2023 by the end of the year, assigning a task to the Ministry of Environment and Energy Security with preparing a study on the development of the CCS framework. This study, which is publicly available, it was published in 2025, and for the elaboration of the study, the ministry, of course, was the leader, but also the regulator and other public entities which has competencies on the CCS and on research, also academia were involved. The study contained an analysis of the technical aspects, economical one, and the regulatory aspects for adopting a value chain framework on the CCS. The study also identifies the main emission clusters and the infrastructure required for the sector's development. So based on this study, the government subsequently approved a delegation bill. Currently, this bill is under parliamentary review as it is ordinary law aimed at regulating the whole value chain of CCUS. The delegation provides for the adoption of one or more legislative decrees governing specific aspects of the of the CCUS, the capture, the transport, utilization, classifying network-based transport and geological storage as natural monopoly activities subject to the electricity and gas regulator, that the independent authority, which will adopt and establish also transparent and non-discriminatory access rules and define tariff systems. Considering that the adoption of this law, it takes a few months, it will take other months for discussion in the parliament. The legislator decided to anticipate some parts of this framework, and early this year in February, we think a law decree that was an emergency one on the lowering the bills for citizens and increasing the competitiveness of the country, provided that pending the adoption of a comprehensive CCUS framework, the regulator will define within 120 days, so by August, hopefully, will define a preliminary set of principles and criteria for access to CO2 transport network and storage sites, as well as for accounting of the capture of CO2 delivered to networks and storage. This is a very significant intervention, as it is immediately a disposition that assigns the authority a technical regulatory role over the future national CO2 infrastructure, providing at the same time also certainty to operators already during the development phase of initial projects. So the reform that the Italian legislator has in mind is it will reshape the responsibilities of public authorities involved, it will foster the competition in CO2 capture and utilization activities, and firmly it will integrate CCUS into national energy policies as a complementary tool to renewable energy, especially for those sectors that are called hard to abate industrial sectors. Overall, it is clear that the legislator aims not merely to establish an authorization framework, which is part of this package, but the aim is to create a fully regulated CO2 market, integrating CO2 into the national energy policy, and also creating these conditions, the necessary conditions for the hard to abate to invest in this technology. So the national legislation, the national path, it fits very well with the much broader European strategy. Europe is doing a lot on this respect, and the CCS at European level and also on the national level now is considered to be an essential technology for achieving climate targets without undermining the competitiveness of European industry. So Italy is also working to support the decarbonization of the hard to abate industrial sectors in industries that some of them, for example, cement presented here, steel, chemicals, and the refineries, they have these unavoidable emissions, and so the CCS is an indispensable tool to decarbonize. The emission trading system already recognized the CO2 that is captured, monitored, and permanently stored, which does not account for the emissions. And if the requirement are of the directive that has been adopted in 2009, number 31, are respected, this already creates an incentive to invest in CCS. Then, as the colleague Yvonne said, there is under discussion and under evaluations to the decision on including or not including the removals within the ETS. We will see what will be decided with the revision of the ETS directive that will be launched in July 15th. At the same time, we have also the CBAM, which extends the carbon cost to import, preventing the disadvantages for EU companies. Italy, for the CCS, has set a national target in the National Energy and Climate Plan. This target is approximately 4 million tons of CO2 captured and stored annually by 2030. This target is strongly linked and relies in particular on the development of Ravenna hub, which is expected to be one of the main storage hubs in the Mediterranean. And the ministry is working as well to make this happen. At the same time, Italy also, Italian companies, some of them, they benefit from the EU financial instruments, from the Innovation Fund, the fund that is financed by the EU ETS auction revenues. There are some companies that they have win these calls, let's say competition. This fund is very useful because it covers somehow, let's say, part of the funding gap. So the Innovation Fund, as you might know, it covers both the pilot projects and the commercial scale plans. And it helps to reduce investor risk and accelerate the technological deployment. As I said, we have several projects that has been approved within the Innovation Fund. We have a project from Marcegaglia, which is linked to Ravenna hub. We have the project Dream of Heidelberg Materials. We have Hera and another project. Hopefully, other projects will join in the. It will be, to other projects like Ravenna hub. Hopefully, we'll have the opportunity to have this to be funded by the Innovation Fund. So in this sense, I would say that regulation, economic incentives, and infrastructure development proceed hand on hand. And the overall goal is to reduce emission, of course, but also to build, in order to achieve this target, to build a complete CO2 industrial value chain that is capable to strengthen the competitiveness of the Italian production system and European one, of course. So completing this framework, we have also other pieces of legislations, European ones that are directly applicable in the member states, such as Net Zero Industrial Act, which sets the target at EU level, but also at companies level. And also this has a role because it helps to foster the developments and the drafting of legislation in the member states, in the EU, at national level, and to speed up also at EU level to regulate those activities that can be regulated at EU level better than at a national level. And this brings me to the cross-border transport of the CO2. So it is very essential, the ratification of the amendments of Article 6 of the London Protocol. We have recognized and we have analyzed that without this step, Italy can develop capture storage projects only within its own borders, but cannot fully participate in cross-border CO2 flow that are destined for geological storage. And this creates limitations to the Italian companies which may lack access to storage sites located in other member states. And on the other hand, strategic infrastructure such as Ravenna hub would not be able to fully achieve its potential by receiving CO2 from abroad, with possible impact also for the European project of common interest such as Callisto. So the ratification would allow Italy to fully integrate into the future European CCS network, contributing to the Net Zero Industrial Act and to strengthen the competitiveness of the Italian companies, which would gain access to the European CO2 storage market. The market, it will be soon in place, and hopefully it will be also a liquid market. Naturally, all these issues, legislative pieces that I mentioned, they should be handled carefully by the public authorities, as the cross-border CO2 transport could be perceived as a waste importation. So we need to be very good in communicating these steps. In reality, it is the CCS is an essential component of the European decarbonization policies and is subject to strict requirements in terms of monitoring safety and environmental liability. However, we need to be very good in communicating these pieces of legislations. Thank you. I'll be glad to receive any questions you might have.
Thank you, Agime. I think we're running slightly short on time. So I think we'll just move on to the next speaker, who's also kind of talking about the Ravina project. So Mr. Paolo Testini, when you're ready, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Let me just try to also share my slides.
Yep.
Okay. Someone else was sharing. Now I will probably be able to do that. So
There
can you confirm that it's the slides?
There we go. Yeah, it's working.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much, Linda. Thank you everyone for this kind invitation. Good to have a chance to present Ravenna CCS, and I think it's very well positioned after Agime Gerbeti from the ministry gave us, let's say, the picture on the evolution of the Italian regulatory framework for CCS. So I'm Paolo Testini. I am director for decarbonization projects and energy scenarios at Snam, which includes the development of CCS projects. Snam, for those of you that don't know it, is the Italian TSO for natural gas. It's a listed company. So in Italy, we manage mainly three infrastructures for natural gas, which is transportation pipelines, underground storage, and LNG regasification. Apart from Italy, we have some interests and some participation in companies which operate in similar business that you can see in the map. They are basically positioned either in Northern Africa, Balkans area, Austria, France, and we also have an interest in interconnector pipeline between Europe and UK and the Carbonex. We are talking about CCS. I think this slide, I can skip it because there was already like a lot of talk and everyone is knowledgeable about what CCS is. It's more important to explain, okay, why we believe that CCS is an important lever. We basically see in this page how the different, let's say, information provider and scenario provider, IRENA and IPCC basically show that the CCS contribution to decarbonization is fundamental, and basically without CCS we cannot achieve the decarbonization target that have been set. So that's the reason why at Snam we invest into CCS, and we firmly believe that it is important to achieve these goals. Going more in details, what are these goals at European and Italian level? Three columns on this chart. The first one is basically the industrial carbon management, the CO2 capture from the European Commission, which sets a target of 50 million tons per annum by 2030, 280 by 2040, 450 by 2050 million tons of CO2 to be either utilized or stored. As you can see in this page, the target at 2030 is expected to be achieved mainly through storage. Another way to read the same number is basically to look at Net Zero Industry Act, which sets a binding target of 50 million tons storage capacity to be developed by oil and gas producers. So this is an obligation for 44 oil and gas producers, and Italian oil and gas producers, including our partner Eni, have an obligation to develop almost 7 million tons per annum CO2 storage. The same number again, you can find it, you can read it in the National Energy and Climate Plan. Again, Miss Gerbeti, just before myself, she was mentioning the Italian targets. The National Energy and Climate Plan in Italy sets a target of 4 million tons per annum by 2030. I'll skip the slide because this is like an overview of what's happening in Europe, and I'll focus on our project, which is Ravenna CCS. So Ravenna CCS, Ravenna is located in the northern Adriatic Sea. You can see in the map, the purple point is the location of the storage hub, which is a hub of multiple fields, which used to be oil and gas, actually natural gas fields, which have been developed, and natural gas production has occurred for a few decades. Now the fields are in a phase of advanced depletion, and they are suitable to store CO2. Together with our partner, it's a JV between Eni and Snam. We are developing a project which will achieve 4 million tons per annum by 2030 and can achieve up to 16 million tons per annum as full potential after 2030. The overall capacity of the stores is 500 million tons, which makes it 70% of the announced cumulative storage capacity in the Mediterranean area. One point which is very important, which is in the bottom left of this slide, this project is different from other projects in Europe because it is much more than a project. It is a real plant because together with Eni, we decided to invest and complete the phase one, which was a fully fledged carbon capture, transportation and storage initiative with a capacity of 25 kilotons per annum, which qualifies it as industrial scale, although small. And the performance that we collected were very, very positive, even if the conditions were challenging because we were capturing the CO2 from the flue gas of natural gas compressors. So the concentration the starting concentration was rather low. So the data will be precious for the development of the subsequent phase, and the possibility to have a plant to show to politicians, local communities, emitters has been invaluable in advancing the project. The last thing that I want to mention is there is a very strong demand for storage in Ravenna. The demand comes from both northern Italy, which will be connected with the pipeline network to be developed by Snam, and it's the blue square that you can see in the northern part of Italy, and from places that will need to be connected via shipping. I'm talking about the clusters, the industrial clusters in the southern part of Italy and neighboring countries, including Croatia, Greece, France, and Spain, from which we record an important demand. In terms of demand, we ran a market survey in 2024 to evaluate the potential of our project. We got to reply. It was addressed only to companies with sites in Italy. So these numbers exclude the potential demand that might come from industrial sites which are located outside Italy. We got basically interest from 61 companies, and the volumes, so you can see them on the right part of the slides, were basically more than 27 million tons per annum by 2030 and more than 34 by 2040, which is a figure that you should compare with the capacity of our project, which, as I mentioned before, will be 4 million tons in its first industrial scale phase by 2030 and up to 16 million tons per annum after 2030. Let me just also zoom in on the pipeline network development. This is a zoom on the northern part of Italy. As you can see from Ravenna, we have a first part of network that connects to Ferrara, which is in a city with an important industrial cluster and is also geographically ideally located to basically be the starting point for further, let's say, the developments of the network. So for the part of the network from Ravenna to Ferrara, we have completed advanced engineering study, and we also received a positive environmental impact assessment. So we are now in the process of the development consent order, the finalized permitting. The rest of the network, as you can see, there are two basically branches, two main branches. One goes towards northeast of Italy, towards Venice. The other goes towards west. Which one will come first will develop on the evolution of the regulation, and at the same time on the evolution of demand, and where we have firm commitments from emitters. That's it on my side. So that's what I prepared. So I don't know if there are any questions. I'm happy to take them.
Yep, thank you, Paolo. We do have one question here from Kevin Dale. So the map which showed transport routes to Ravenna suggests very long distance transport. Why is that? Are there no geological storage spaces in other locations closer to Spain and Greece?
I mean, after my presentation, I think my colleague from EnEarth will talk about the project that they are developing in Greece, which is the only other advanced project that is basically being developed in Mediterranean area. So I would these are not the only two options that exist in the Mediterranean basins. There are other fields that we are already exploring ourselves together with our partner ENI, and there could be a potential also from saline aquifers. But let's say as an answer, the two answers that I can give to you is that it's let's say the natural resources in terms of storage in the Mediterranean basins are probably lower than those in the northern sea area, or needs further more studies to be investigated and then developed. And the second answer is, I mean, the routes that we see on this chart are potential routes. The prioritization, one of the factors to prioritize and to define the economics of the different opportunities will be also the geographical distance. So it will be taken into account either directly or indirectly, because the longer the distance, the higher the cost. But also, let's keep in mind that if you compare the distance that you see in the map, for instance, from France to Italy, or from Greece to Italy, I don't think that these distances are very different from other routes that are already being, let's say, used in the North Sea, or that are being planned in some other projects.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that answer. I think we will move on to the next speaker, Nikolas Rigas, who is going to talk about the Prinos project today.
Hi, Linda. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and big hello to my fellow good friends and neighbors. Paolo, good to see you again. I'm happy to be here and happy to be speaking about Prinos a little bit. To a little bit on what Paolo just finished in. We are both in the very lucky position that the Mediterranean is not, well, lucky or unlucky position that the Mediterranean is not as well explored as the North Sea is, and there aren't as many known reservoirs as in the north. Hence, in the Med at the moment, there are two projects that are being developed, and I think the combined capacity between us and what Paolo just presented doesn't even cover 10% of the needs of our two countries combined in terms of pure industrial carbon emissions. So we're sitting in a space that we are here to develop solutions for emitters, and there's not a lot of optionality in where they can go. Hence, why we both need to be very prudent about this, and obviously we have to be very careful how we progress. But at the same time, we are in the fortunate situation that it is not the chicken and the egg as it is in the North Sea. They're not arguing over which storage site they will go to. They have limited choices, and we are essentially one of the two. I will share my screen and I will share PowerPoint. There we go. I think I'm sharing the right one.
Yep. Yep, we can see it.
Amazing. So I'll talk a bit about the project now. Prinos, as I mentioned earlier, is one of two projects in the Mediterranean that's being developed and will be developed until 2030. It is the only known storage site in Greece, simply because it's the only field that has ever been produced out of Greece. We managed in February of this year to receive a storage permit for 1 million tons, which is the first in south of Europe. And it was the third permit. I think there's a fourth one out as of last week in the EU. It was a huge accomplishment because it's 4 years of studies and works that we have been doing, plus another 15 years of history that we've had in this field, coming together into showing to the EU, to the regulator, and to the Greek government that this is a safe and suitable storage site, which is, I think, the key here. Because commercial and finance and everything, it works only if you have a suitable and safe storage site. The rest is secondary. And this is a message that I want to be a big advocate of. We have to be very careful into making sure that CO2 will be permanently stored, will be underground forever, and there will be as minimal risk as we can take. We are now about to issue, and this is fairly fresh news. We're about to issue a CPR, it's going to book 51.5 million tons of 2P reserves. If I'm not mistaken, it's going to be one of the first in the world for 2P capacity. So we're very happy to have reached that point as well. NSAI is the company that did the CPR report. We will be publishing very, very soon the summary note. And the project is basically in the north of Greece, and we'll be receiving both liquid and compressed CO2 from the local region. It's a PCI project alongside with our fellow friends in Ravenna. We are in the Mediterranean CCS plan and a PCI project. And we have also 15 MOUs from a very similar map as you saw before, and I'll show it a little bit further down, with emitters all over the Mediterranean that are looking for solutions to store. In the Greek value chain, there's over €1 billion in grants from the EU Innovation Fund and other EU instruments in order to develop Prinos and develop the CCS value chain that we have, of which 270 million is allocated to us. It's 150 million from the Greek government and the RRF, and 120 million from the Connecting Europe facility. So we're a very well-funded project. We're moving very strongly. And we're in a position that since our storage permit has been received, we have started construction. The first phase of the project is happening. So we have brought a platform into Greece that we will be installing, and I'll show it a little bit further down. And we will be installing it later in the year. And we will be drilling 2 wells, hopefully in 2027, beginning of 2027, one to inject CO2 and one to produce water, as we have a closed aquifer in the system. Location and subsurface, very briefly, and I'll skip these very fast, because very often people don't know where Prinos is or Kavala. We're in the north of Greece. We're sitting in a place that, as I said before, is the only offshore facility in Greece and the only facility that's ever produced oil out of Greece. Hence, there is industrial activity. And it's a very impressive operation. It's been going on since the 1980s. And we have been operating it for the last 20 years. The field is, as you can imagine, since the 1980s, it's come towards a point in its life that's towards the end of its oil-producing life. And CCS is here to step in and extend the life of this facility to another 20, 30 years down the line. The reservoir, which, as I said before, is the most important part, is a reservoir, as I said, a closed aquifer. We are very strong believers that it is one of the safest sites in the world to store CO2. There's 1,000 meters of salt layers on top of the reservoir itself. It is a reservoir that's been explored very well, with over 80 wells drilled in the past for the oil-producing side of it. And we will be injecting CO2 and producing water out of it to reduce the pressure and make sure that CO2 is stored safely and permanently. The new facilities. It's over €1 billion project. It is, as I said before, both a liquid and a compressed CO2 project. We have started the project, the FEED with Kent, an engineering contractor out of the UK, who is running the full capacity of this project. And it is essentially a CO2 offloading terminal, which is comprised of a jetty, storage tanks, temporary compressors, and the pipeline to an offshore platform that we will be installing now for the full scale of the project, and inject CO2 and produce water. As I said before, a platform is being installed. It finished construction a couple of weeks ago. It came down to Greece for its final preparations. We've booked a vessel to install it, and in the latter part of this year, we should be installing it. All of our permits are in place. We did a very thorough environmental permit, very thorough installation permit as well, and everything is in place, ready for us to start construction in the phase 1 of the project. FEED is ongoing, and it's going strong. We're estimating by the end of the year we will be done, and we're going to be ready to take FID beginning of next year. On the commercial and regulatory part, Greece is one of the, I would say, champions when it comes to this, because the Greek government very early on decided to adopt the 2009 directive and transcribe it and pass all the legislation required, with the most recent legislation being both the primary and the secondary legislation being amended and passed in February of this year, which sets out the rules of the game, how everything is going to be built, how everything is going to be, and how all the interactions are going to work. And it was passed and voted from the parliament in December, and the regulator published their secondary legislation in February. So Greece is moving, and the EU is moving as well. I don't want to talk about things that were talked about before. I think we all know the trend. And again, I will skip this, but this is essentially a map of storage permits in Europe, and you can clearly see from what we've said before that the Mediterranean really lacks in capacity. And as long as the cross-border CO2 and the transportation of CO2 to countries outside of the EU is a restriction, the Mediterranean will have an issue on where to find storage sites. Egypt is a very good location that we're operating in, and we have a field and we're ready to continue, but this, I believe, comes secondary to focusing on getting these two projects over the line that we have in front of us. As I said before, this is our map. I realized recently that there's some islands missing, so please forgive me for that. We also try to be a hub in the Mediterranean and help out, as I said before, both us and the project that's over there do not fit for the capacity that is being developed on the capture side. And finally, to close, Prinos is a third-party access CO2 storage site. All we do is we're developing the site. We're developing a jetty and the storage site. We don't want to get into transport. We don't want to get into capture. We know what we're doing when it comes to injecting CO2 and producing and reservoirs. Hence, our project boundary is limited to there, and we will be acting as an independent storage site open to all emissions in the Mediterranean. That's it for me.
All right, thank you very much. We do have one question in the chat box. Is Energen an obligated entity for ENZIA? Are ENZIA obligated entities participating in this development?
We have an obligation of 400,000 tons out of EnEarth in Italy that we need to create of capacity. It is one of the two oil productions that we have in Europe. It's that and Greece. We are working with EU and continuing to work on it, but we have significantly more capacity than the obligations that have been set to us from NZIA.
All right, thank you. I think in your presentation, you also mentioned that the Prinos storage site is the safest. I'm just quite curious about that, because I think CO2 permeation is somewhat of a concern. So I'm wondering how permanent the storage there is.
Not the safest, one of the safest, and apologies if I said the safest, but I'd want to, it's one of the safest sites, simply because in my personal view, and I'm not a geologist, it's a closed formation, which means that it is a reservoir that is very well explored, and we know very well the formation and the data that is underneath the ground. Hence why I believe it's one of the safest sites. Information in this industry and in the oil and gas and now CCS industry is one of the most important things. The more information you have a place, the better predictions you can make. Of course, nothing is 100% certain in life, and especially when you're talking about things 3,000 meters below ground. But from an information standpoint, we were able to de-risk it very well. Hence why the EU was able to give us one of the first storage permits in Europe to a company that is, that has proven through years of track record that we can operate and execute fields like that.
Cool. That's very interesting to know, and I think that probably also sort of sets an example for other projects in terms of safety measures and like sort of pre-execution studies. Thank you very much.
Very quickly, and I'll close. It took us 4 years to get the storage permit. The procedure started in 2022. And it was very good to see how thorough the EU was and the Greek regulator before awarding the permit to us. We had an exploration permit that we worked very hard on to make sure that all the information was there. And the EU was very thorough to scrutinize all the information that we submitted, which, especially in this field, I strongly believe is the way to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that information. So we're going to move on to the panel discussion now. For this panel, we have 3 panelists with us today. So we're here to talk about cross-sector collaboration. No organization can hit their 2030 targets or 2050 targets in a vacuum. So we're all dependent on each other to ensure that CCUS value chain is connected and operating smoothly. We have Peter from Gasni. Mr. Peter Tavernier, there you are. And then Enrique Corneo from Offshore Energies UK, and then Diana Casey from Global Cement and Concrete Association. So we're going to zoom in sort of into the UK and EU region and examine how we can encourage international collaboration in this area. So to start us off, could I please ask you all to do a little self-introduction and maybe a little bit about your role in expanding the international CCUS sprawl, please? Could we start with Diana?
Yes, thank you. It's lovely to be here. My name is Diana Casey. I very recently joined the Global Cement and Concrete Association, or GCCA, as Cement and ESG Director after 15 years representing the UK cement and concrete sector. So GCCA's role in expanding CCUS falls into a number of categories. Firstly, we advocate for the enabling policy environment that's going to help implement carbon capture at cement plants across the world. This includes calling for things like funding support, a regulatory environment that facilitates rather than blocks CCS, and opportunities to increase demand for low carbon products. And that gives confidence to invest because the market's going to be there for the products at the end. Secondly, we're developing tools to actually help our members deploy CCS. One of these is a book and claim scheme that's going to help provide a new revenue stream to make CCS projects investable. And then finally, we help to build knowledge across the sector by enabling the sharing of learnings as projects start to get off the ground, which is really important to ensure that everybody's not making the same mistakes and we can kind of learn as we go and hopefully make things quicker and easier for the next project. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then next, can we have Peter Tavernier, please?
Yes, good morning. Lovely to be here today. So my name is Peter Tavernier. I'm Managing Director of the Gasni CCS business line. Gasni is a Dutch TSO working on the transport of natural gas, methane for the last 56 years, and now pivoting to hydrogen and carbon transport as well. So we are developing and constructing a CO2 network that connects the largest industrial clusters in Northwest Europe, starting with the port of Rotterdam, which is, I think you all know, one of the biggest emission clusters that we have. And then further on tying it into the Antwerp region, the Moerdijk region, and also the Ruhr area in Germany. So it's a truly international connected CO2 system. Consisting basically of 5 projects. The first project is the Portos project. I think you all will know the Portos project is under construction. I think 80% on the way, connecting 4 industrial emitters in the port of Rotterdam, Exxon refinery, the Shell refinery, among our customers. And we are going to transport 2.5 million tons per annum from the port of Rotterdam towards an offshore field, and then store it permanently 3 kilometers below the shore. Project is expected to go live next year. So it's very advanced in the construction, and that's the first project. And on that project, we built a next project. The next one will be Aramis. And Aramis is a much larger project. It's a 200-kilometer pipeline. FEED is finished. We're now in the contracting phase. We have a final permit, and we hope to have FID on Aramis next year. And Aramis is a 22.5 MTPA project, so it's quite sizable, and it lands in a zone in the North Sea where there are multiple stores. I think the lower bandwidth of the estimation of the store capacity is around 400 gigaton, and the higher one is around 2,000 gigatons. So that is ample storage capacity for the next decades, I would say. And it's also very close to the UK. So we're also looking in as a next step to tying in the Aramis trunk line to the UK as a further expansion possibility. So those are the Portos Aramis, and we have also 2 projects that connect then to one to the German market, which is called the Delta Rhine corridor. It's a 200-kilometer pipeline all the way from the Maasvlakte Rotterdam to the east. Currently in the permitting phase, and we have a similar pipeline from the Maasvlakte Rotterdam as well, going south to the Antwerp. That's 45 kilometers. And also that is being permitted. As you know, permitting is always the most lengthy phase of this kind of project development. So we really try to develop an international hub, a very liquid hub. And the reason why we want to construct a liquid hub, that the more you transport, the lower the tariff, the more affordable for the emitters. And that's basically why we all do this. We do this to provide the most affordable CCS solution for Northwest European industries.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And then Enrique, please.
Hi, good morning and afternoon, where you are as well. So yeah, my name is Enrique Cornejo, and I'm the Energy Policy Director at Offshore Energies UK. So we are the industry association representing the integrated offshore energy sector in the UK, with over 460 member companies from across the value chain. And one of our important focus areas is obviously carbon capture and storage. Within our membership, we have all of the key developers of projects in the UK, including the projects that have already reached FID, the transport and storage projects, and also the projects that are looking to be part of this growing network connecting emitters and transport and storage networks. And also we have as members licensees of all of the licenses that are being progressed across the North Sea. So for us, the key objective is to ensure that we move from having this emerging CCS sector in the UK, which is obviously supported by government, and government playing a really important role in de-risking those early projects. That's been absolutely critical for those projects to go ahead. But looking forward, we're doing quite a lot of work to try and make sure that we start to move away from that dependency on subsidy. And we have in the UK all of the ingredients really to become the European leader in carbon storage solutions and services. As Agime mentioned just now, there is significant demand for access to UK storage services from European emitters and European infrastructure owners. And in the UK, we have really more storage than we will need in the short and medium term. So for us, it's really important on the policy perspective to ensure that we enable that access for European emitters. That can be really important to help reduce that dependency on subsidies, add additional revenue streams for the source, further de-risk the projects. But also there are important policies, and Diana touched on some of those, right, which go beyond that, that can start looking at how do we add additional value for products enabled by CCS and develop a market for products for low carbon goods, that have additional premium if they're decarbonized by CCS. So there's a lot happening at the moment. The key objective now is to ensure that we progress all of the licenses that have been awarded in the UK, over 20 licenses already in the first round, a second round that has closed at the moment. So we're expecting to have even more capacity in the UK being appraised and progressed in the UK North Sea, enable that access to the European emitters, remove the regulatory barriers that still prevent us from achieving that, and then also enabling those future markets for low carbon goods that can then reduce that dependence on government support. Also, we have a very active role in the technical development of guidelines for the sector. So we have produced the industry guidelines for well decommissioning for CO2 storage, just updated the first version with a second version that has an incorporation of the learnings of the Track 1 projects. And this is really important to set out from a technical perspective how to decommission a CO2, how to decommission an oil and gas well, and making sure that it is suitable and ready to be used as CO2 store. So very happy to talk about that later on.
All right, thank you. That's quite a lot of information, and I think we're probably going to come back to that later on as well. So my next question, what would the ideal CCUS sprawl look like? What would that look like to you? Could we start with, sorry, someone's...
Not just looking.
Oh, there we go. That's better. Sorry. So the question is, what does the ideal CCUS sprawl look like to you? Could we perhaps start with global concrete and cement, please?
Yes, sure. So CCUS is really essential for decarbonising cement due to the emissions profile from cement manufacture. We know that cement production accounts for around 7% of global CO2 emissions, which does make it one of the most carbon intensive industrial sectors. Now, the problem we have is that a significant proportion of those emissions, between 60 and 70%, result from the chemical process of converting our raw materials into cement. So it's not just from the combustion of fuel that makes up the other 30 or 40%, but those emissions that we call process emissions from the breakdown of the raw materials really can't be mitigated through any other technology levers like energy efficiency or renewable fuels. So for our sector, if we are to get to net zero, we need CCS at every cement plant, and there's thousands across the whole world. So really, our ambition is to get CCUS not just at a few plants in specific regions or certain locations, but ideally widespread global deployment throughout the sector. So for us, that's what CCUS sprawl looks like to us. It's trying to get it at every cement plant if we can.
Awesome, thank you so much. And then can we go with Gaston, please?
Yeah, so I think Linda understands the question what the ideal project is. Yeah, I think what we experience is that CCUS is extremely complex. So we are really in the midst of contracting with customers, 15-year contracts, so they're quite large commitments, and really European industries are already in a difficult situation, and then committing long-term to storage and transportation contract, plus constructing a capture installation. That's quite a large commitment that they actually have to make. So you see industry is really struggling with that. And that struggle is not easy to resolve because it will remain capital intensive. However, what is helpful is to approach it as integrated as possible. So to integrate the transportation value chain as much as possible, from the fence of the plant all the way to the injection well, and preferably also integrate that with a storage contract. So make it as simple, as transparent as possible for the customers, and also of course make it as affordable as possible. And by combining these services into one package, we believe that's really helping the emitters to build a business case around a CCS project. So the ideal project for us is the most integrated project as possible.
All right, thank you. And then offshore energies, if you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and I'd like very briefly to describe what the ideal system across the North Sea could look like in the future, right? And for us, it won't be a number of isolated projects, but a really integrated and resilient North Sea CCS network, combining pipelines, shipping, port infrastructure, and storage hubs into an integrated, flexible European carbon management system. We've done recently a piece of work. We're happy to post in the chat the details of that to try and understand what a resilient CCS system across the North Sea would look like. And the key components are those multiple transport routes rather than dependence on a single corridor. It's important to start investing in these early corridors to then start growing a network going further. Shared offshore storage hubs serving multiple countries is really important. Common technical standards as well for CO2 quality, metering and custody transfer as well. And especially in early projects, I think it's important to build in spare capacity and redundancy to accommodate future growth. So that may be seen by some as underutilization, and obviously there's a risk, if you like, associated to building a project early on that may be bigger than what demand would potentially show from the market. But this shouldn't be seen as an inefficiency, and that's what we're seeing in some of the early projects. So I think it's important to start considering this. So yeah.
Thank you. So my next question is to Mr. Peter Tafnier. So the organization, as you mentioned before, is involved in quite a lot of successful CCS projects like Porthos, Aramis, and then DRC. So what were the biggest challenges that Gasni overcame to achieve sort of seamless cross-border CO2 transport? What are some of the lessons to be learned from these projects?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think the first and most important lesson learned is to collaborate and to be transparent. Enrique also mentioned the CO2 specification. That's a key element. We can only resolve that if we work together. Cement and lime has different requirements than the chemical industry. So how are we going to work together to make sure it works for everybody? I think transparency and working together, and indeed to create one international well-connected network. It becomes difficult if everybody tries to optimize its own business case and its own value chain. Then it really becomes difficult. But if the various TSOs in the various countries start to cooperate and approach as one integrated Northwest European network, then I think we can really be successful.
All right, thank you very much. And then my next question is to Diana. So you have presented the UK cement industry at national, European, and global level. So how does the UK incentivize collaboration effectively through perhaps either policy or business model?
Yeah, I think one of the things the UK has done well is to develop CCS projects as a whole value chain. They started taking this approach focused on industrial clusters, which then resulted in collaboration between the storage, the transport, and the capture projects themselves to deliver the whole lot. Alongside that, they've had quite a strong CCS business model based on a contracts for difference approach, which has also helped support those first-of-a-kind projects in different sectors and remove some of the barriers relating to risk. But I think getting those industrial sectors together to do some things that Peter just mentioned, to like look at how do you have, one pipeline that lots of emitters connect into go into a storage site has been really good. There have been some downsides to that because it's only the sites that kind of won the geographical lottery and are situated in those chosen locations that can then benefit. So for the cement sector in the UK, that means 1 out of 10 cement plants has support for a carbon capture project. Now, we do see progress starting to be made outside of those sort of chosen clusters. One example in my sector is the Peak Cluster, which is the world's largest cement and lime CCS project. And that's received some equity investment from the National Well Fund for engineering work on the pipeline. But as of yet, there's no visibility on the support for either end, whether the capture plant or the storage site. So there's a bit more to be done there. But I think, the initial approach to get things moving in those industrial clusters was very good. And it also gets people thinking about how they can then connect into that infrastructure from outside. So hopefully that outlines the UK situation a bit.
Thank you so much. So as Peter mentioned before, the Gasni's work is also trying to connect with the UK. So I'm wondering, how can the UK and EU sort of align your regulatory frameworks for the North Sea storage sharing? And what are some of the biggest policy barriers to sharing technology or like infrastructure across borders? Enrique, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, no, of course. And this is a discussion we've had in industry for a while already, for the last few years, I think it's fair to say. And just to be clear, the issue is really policy, not technology, right? I think, the technology is in the right place. The investors are ready. It's really policy that is holding us back. And hopefully we're going to see some progress in this area, but also noting that some of the political change in the UK may unfortunately slow things down. Hopefully not. But the UK and the North Sea in general obviously have a lot of potential, as we've discussed just now, to become the European storage hub in CCS. And to maximize the opportunity, really the key barriers that we need to remove are focused on, firstly, linking, connecting the emissions trading schemes from the UK and Europe. This is really the key barrier, and seeking alignment is important to make sure that investors on both sides have the certainty they need to know that they can go ahead with these projects, and the emissions abated will be accounted for in the respective emissions trading systems. And there have been quite a lot of discussions and negotiations from UK and European governments on this. There was an expectation that this would progress in a summit in a few weeks' time. That will probably move for when we have a new prime minister here in the UK. But really, that's a critical point, right? Because from having that certainty, then everything else flows. We've discussed London Protocol before. That's not unsurmountable. I think there's very good progress already been made bilaterally between the UK and European countries, including Belgium. The standards is another important piece that we've discussed. More widely aligning rules for third-party access and tariff frameworks will be important. And we have already seen some progress, right? So just to reinforce the point that technology is not the barrier, it's really policy. And we need to catch up, because, as Norway with Northern Lights have demonstrated, there is demand for cross-border services. And phase 1 and phase 2 of Northern Lights have some great support from the market. We just need to speed up those policy hurdles to overcome them and ensure that we are showing to investors the certainty they need to make this real.
I think that makes sense. Would anyone else like to add to that? Nope, all good. Okay, so my next question is to Gasni again. So Gasni obviously sits in the middle as like the infrastructure provider. So what commitments or guarantees you need or do you expect from heavy users, like perhaps someone like GCCA and energy producers, before you can confidently build out the transport networks?
Well, we do it on our own balance sheet. So we fund the development of this project. So we have quite a substantial team. Our team is around 150 people that works on CCS projects. So the portals, but also the onshore projects and Rames. We do that with on the basis that we believe that CCS will become a very important infrastructure play in Northwest Europe. We believe as a gas TSO, we have a natural role to play there, and we have the proper competences to develop that network. So it's not that we require funds to develop our projects. However, the moment you are at FID, we try to design our project future-proof. And what I mean with that is not all customers will be there on day one. There will be some customers on day one, but over time, the customer base will grow. You probably only will start with 20-25 of your customer base that you can actually service. But you still want to build a pipeline that fits all the customers. So you need to over-dimension it. And for that, you need support. We calculate in the business case around 40% of support, state aid support, EU, the Netherlands. It doesn't really matter where it comes from. So you need some coverage for that underutilization cost. And we believe that around 40% benchmark is quite okay. We didn't get that for the Portos project. We actually got less. but we still took FID, but that meant that we had a low return on our investment. For the Aramis project, we are around 40%, so that fits with that target and with the other projects as well. So it's not so much during the development phase we need funds, but the moment you are at FID to build the future proof, then we need support.
I see, thank you. So this is kind of like what they say, the chicken and egg problem. So you can't really wait for commitment and then build out, but you have to sort of make your networks future proof, and then more customers will be attracted to that. So then my next question is to Diana. What are some of the challenges or barriers to scaling CCUS in the cement sector, and what cross-border solutions can address these?
Yeah, so addressing the carbon without borders challenge requires aligning things like economic, political, and technological systems on a global scale to transform CCUS into a coordinated international effort rather than a fragmented local kind of initiatives or efforts, which in itself is incredibly challenging given geopolitical situations and all sorts of things. So there's definitely some significant barriers, I would say, but I think there are also some solutions. So maybe if I could look at a few of those. The first for our sector is the current high cost associated with carbon capture technologies, which can often limit widespread adoption without substantial financial support. Financing is a massive challenge, particularly for companies who need to be able to deploy these technologies and produce cement, in the case of my sector, for a competitive and global market. We know that accelerating deployment is critical, and particularly focusing on transitioning from, some pilot projects that we've seen to full-scale industrial operations, and ideally this decade. So we're sort of gearing ourselves up for the sort of 2050 type timelines for net zero. We do need strong financial support to kind of make that happen and attract the private funding that is needed. A lot of we're asking for financial support, but our members are willing to commit their funding to it. So it's unlocking that. I think secondly, there is a lack of sufficient infrastructure around CCS, whether it's for transporting, but also we know the storage sites are there, but they're not all permitted or, etc. Yeah, they don't have the permissions in place. So developing that shared infrastructure is really essential. And, having that infrastructure will help enable economies of scale and kind of hopefully facilitate some of that cross-border carbon management as well. Thirdly, I think policy inconsistency across regions really complicates deployment. There's different regulations, different incentives, different market conditions, and that all creates a bit of uncertainty for some investors and project developers. So I think enabling investment through clear and stable policy frameworks really helps attract both the public and the private capital. And some of the things that our sector needs are carbon pricing, subsidies, the creation of markets for low carbon products is particularly important. And as a trade association, we've been doing quite a lot of work on how do you create the demand for these low carbon materials? How do you define what low carbon is? And there are initiatives out there like the Industrial Deep Decarbonisation initiatives that all help generate commitments to purchase these products. And then it gives our producers the confidence to invest knowing the market will be there. And then finally, I think just strengthening international collaboration, to harmonise things like standards, to share knowledge, to ensure CCUS technologies are accessible globally, is really helpful. And we just need to see a more unified approach where we can take one.
All right, thank you. I think to follow up on your first point, so you said your customers or your members are also willing to pay for the CCUS technology. I'm wondering, what are some of the incentives for them to sort of invest in this area?
I think where we're starting to see demand for low carbon products, I suppose there's two things. First of all, the projects that we've seen develop so far, we've got the Brevik plant in Norway, and the next one coming online is probably going to be the Paiswood plant in the UK. Both of those areas have carbon prices, so you've already got a bit of an incentive. I don't know that the carbon price is really high enough, but at least we've got that sort of stable. There is a carbon price there, and it's hopefully not going anywhere anytime soon. I mean, again, this comes back to some of the political discussion where we don't quite know what's going to happen in the future, but at the moment it's fairly stable. So it gives that confidence to invest. And then we're starting to see, particularly in the UK, for example, the government is committed to the Industrial Decarbonisation Initiative, which means that they are committed to procure low carbon materials. So there's an incentive to invest there and ensure that we can produce those materials in the domestic market. And we're also starting to see some more private initiatives build up. So we're starting to feel this sort of head of steam that is giving the confidence to invest, which is really important.
All right, thank you so much. I think what we're repeatedly hearing today is that storage space is quite abundant, even though you did say that there are permitting issues and there's like a time lag, but we can definitely see the demand being slightly short. So yeah, let's hold on to those incentives and hopefully demand will take off. My next question is to Gasni and also GCCA. Collaboration doesn't only mean sharing benefits, there are also risks to be shared. So what are some of the biggest risks your organization faces when it comes to partnerships? Could we start with Peter, please?
Yeah, thank you, Linda. I think so during development phase, those are not very material. I think at the moment you have contracted to transport CO2 and to store, then parties have invested, and then they need all the parties involved to perform. So one of the key risks is what if the store doesn't perform? Does the emitter then have to pay? And is the transportation party then also liable to that risk, or is actually being covered? So those value chain risks are one of the key criteria we are discussing with customers and we try to resolve. Those are the ones that you can actually resolve in the value chain. So we found the contractual structure to work with that. But then you also have the high impact, low probability items, for which you could normally go to the insurance market, but there is no insurance market that covers that kind of risk. So that's one of the parts that we are discussing with the EU to see if they can, in the initial phase of the market, when we are still learning and we have little data points and there's little redundancy in the system, that government can take over that risk. So those are the specific risks that we are talking about. And one of the key things is what we call the double penalty, the double ETS penalty. So the moment that a customer has invested in a capture installation, he has contracted transport capacity, he has contracted storage capacity. Suppose the store doesn't work, then the only thing that he can actually do is to emit the CO2 to the atmosphere, and he needs to pay ETS. Whereas he already has contracted transport capacity, storage capacity, and also, so then he really is penalized twice. And that's one of the key things we really need to resolve for the industry to make the business case work.
All right.
There's just a flavor of the risk we run into in the contract we develop with customers.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then Diana?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything Peter said there, particularly around the what happens if the transport pipeline goes down? Does the emitter have to pay? Do you need to build in sort of storage silos or something that can help kind of mitigate the risk? What happens if something goes wrong with the storage site? There's quite a lot of value chain. I think the added risk for the production of the material at the end of the day as well is, will it be produced at a competitive price? I know I keep coming back to this, but it's so important to realise that this is not a cheap technology to deploy. And if you put all that investment in one country and then you just end up with higher carbon but cheaper products, then taking the place, you almost end up with a stranded asset potentially, which is a big risk as well. So there's definitely quite a lot kind of around the value chain and then the marketplace as well for us.
All right, thank you so much. So to sort of de-risk these, could I ask Enrique, what policies could help both parties navigate through these risks together, so that the liability doesn't fall on one party? Are there any policies right now that deals with these risks?
Yeah, the first thing to say, and it may be obvious, but these pioneering early projects that have already reached FID do play a very important role in de-risking the whole sector and future projects as well. As we have more data, real world data that demonstrates that these projects perform as expected, then definitely that helps getting the insurance sector more comfortable in supporting future projects. So that's just something really important that some of those early pioneering projects are helping with in a wider sense. Also really important to note that carbon transport and storage infrastructure projects are going to be long life assets, and the payback periods are also going to be long, right? So in some cases potentially decades, right? There are some projects that are looking to start with low volumes and then ramp up when more demand is available. So that means, going back to that point, infrastructure needs to be built ahead of time. That creates a challenge in terms of the risk if that's not managed effectively. So some of the ways that governments and specific policies can definitely support on the risk allocation is, again, learn from these early projects. As Diana said, in the UK, we have this cross-chain risk model that is proven to be very effective in getting those early projects reach FID, but it's going to be very difficult to have the exact same model for all of the project pipeline going forward. So then getting the right learnings from that, I think, is really important to then evolve the model. Transparent and stable transport and storage tariff structures as well. Those common standards for monitoring, reporting and verification. Having across the wider North Sea consistent approaches for long-term storage stewardship as well. And obviously, carbon pricing is a really important component of all of this puzzle. So, in the end, the objective, I think, is to develop a system where we create a framework where risks are allocated to those actors that are best placed to manage them. As I said, with more data, with more projects coming online, the private sector will, have more confidence in doing that and taking more of the risk, and that is obviously in parallel with the evolution of carbon markets. But not having an expectation that all of that risk is always going to be centered in being supported by a government balance sheet.
All right.
But we're making progress, and I think that's helpful.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So one last question to all of you. In one sentence, what concrete signs give you the most confidence in the development of CCUS? Could we start with Diana, please?
Yeah, I think for us, it's starting to see projects actually up and running. So the Norway Brevik plant, and seeing FID being reached on others, and just seeing the commitment there is great. And it's great to be able to turn to the project and say, no, look, it is possible. We've done it. It's here, and it just builds confidence, which is great.
Thank you. And then Peter?
Yeah, I think what gives me most confidence is the consultations we do with customers in the Netherlands, in Belgium and Germany. So we do a lot of on-site visits explaining the CCS journey, the transparent tariffs, the conditions and all that. And we actually see a lot of industrial players working on their projects, on the business cases. So it's not longer PowerPoint, it's really real life. And also if you go to the Porto site, I'm really proud to see there's a huge installation that's going to inject the CO2 in 1 year's time. So it's the actual progress that we see and the actual interest with customers that we experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Enrique?
Yeah, just to echo what Diana and Peter said, this is a real industry now. What I would say, though, is something that I think we just need to continue working on as an industry is to make sure that the public acceptance for CCS is there. I still think that there's a lot more that we can do collectively to ensure that the wider public understand the importance of CCS in protecting jobs across industry, ensuring that our foundational industries are able to transition in a way that we protect those industrial capability skills. CCS is really key for that. There is some good progress there, but I think there's a lot more work that we need to do to ensure that politicians of all parties and colors across Europe are supportive of the sector.
All right, thank you all so much. So with that, I'm going to bring us to the end of today's webinar. Thank you for the fantastic conversations. I hope you all leave with a much clearer understanding of the CCUS market. A huge thank you to our 10 expert speakers for their time and to our audience for the engagement throughout the session. We will be sharing the recording on our events page and also LinkedIn. Don't forget that we will also continue these vital discussions live at the Carbon Capture Global Summit in London this September 22nd and 23rd. We look forward to seeing you all there, and have a great rest of your week. Thank you all so much.